Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody, and thank you for joining us for our ongoing series of webinars focused on the issues that are meaningful to finance and business transformation. Today, we're going to talk about a really great subject called turning compliance into competitive advantage with the SAP Analytics Cloud. And I am joined today by my colleagues and friends, Sarah Thompson. Welcome, Sarah.
Thanks, John.
Kim Dowling, who's our Director of Treasury. Hi, Kim.
Hi, John.
And Julio de la Costa, CPA, and he's head of our Technical Accounting and Advisory Services. Hello, Julio.
Hello, John.
So with that in mind, what we'll talk about is what's going on. So as always, of course, the webinar is being recorded. So go ahead, check that out. We will provide a link to everybody here, as well as those who've registered and attended. So feel free to share it with your best friends. Ask questions throughout the session. So you have a panel down here and you can go ahead and ask those questions. And then of course, download any previous webinars that we have from our homepage. I want to encourage you to contact us and engage with us all over the place, including Bramasol.com. We have lots of great content here, Facebook and LinkedIn. We have some great LinkedIn pages as well as a specific site around analytics and treasury. We also have podcasts and videos that you can download from Apple iTunes, YouTube, and iHeartRadio, so check those out. So today we're going to use kind of a conversational format and walk through this concept of comply, optimize, transform, and talk about turning compliance into competitive advantage. And let me frame for you this idea of comply, optimize, transform. We've been talking about it for a while. So the first step is most companies, and we'll talk about this, have gone to the steps to comply. They've either complied with GAAP regulations around ASC 842 for your leasing, 606 for your revenue accounting, IFRS 9 if you're in Treasury, or just standard GAAP, right? And you've built the foundations. But then what? It's really all about the analytics and being able to optimize. How do I improve my business? How do I improve the processes that I use and move to that next step? And then transformation. And transformation is all about driving new business models. And the key to that, I think, and I'll ask Julio to comment about this and kind of introduce the next couple of bullet points, is analytics and insights. And Julio, as a former controller, analytics and insights and data were crucial to you. And so maybe we can talk about, and you can tee us up on, the results are in. Talk to us about, revenue accounting and what's going on, and then we'll talk about leasing and treasury.
Yes, John. So companies have been, fighting with the compliance of ASC 606 the last 4 years. But what we find today is most companies have already complied, except for the franchisors. So the franchise accounting group has been given an extension due to COVID-19. So they have a little more time, but I think most other companies, public and private, have already complied with ASC 606. I think to your point, John, companies are now, as far as revenue accounting, looking at that optimize, transform stage. And I think we will talk about that shortly, where we talk about how can companies actually optimize and transform their revenue accounting processes.
Sure. What about leasing? That was the big, the 1-2 punch over the past couple of years was rev rec and then leasing.
Yeah, so it's a good point, because a lot of companies were so heavily focused on revenue accounting, and then 2 years later, they were, pushed with the new lease accounting standard. So they actually did get some relief from the FASB for private companies, where private companies actually deferred adoption 1 year. So that's the end of next year. However, I think a lot of companies are still struggling with understanding where they are in their lease accounting cycle, understanding, a completeness set of their lease population. As we know, John, we've seen it in these projects. A lot of companies are still having to find their leases in somebody's desk in other countries. So the amalgamation of a complete lease population is still a challenge, whereas all the different amortization and accounting complexities is still there. So companies are still trying to comply with lease accounting as far as we've seen.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that we've seen, and then we'll touch quickly on treasury and cash management, and maybe we'll ask Kim to comment on that. But Julio, you and I over the past year, have seen more and more companies that quote unquote complied using spreadsheets and database tools, or used, in the case of lease accounting, standalone solutions that don't always deliver what they promise, right?
And I think, John, that is a great point, because as you and I go out and talk to customers, we know that Excel, especially for the accounting and finance world, Excel is a CPA's best friend. And what we also see from the SEC disclosures as well as compliance activities, companies that did do compliance via Excel spreadsheets have run into problems with Sarbanes-Oxley controls, problems with the degradation of these spreadsheets, and just corruption of these large files. When you have a lot of data going into these large Excel files, somebody may make an error, make a mistake, and all of a sudden you've lost all your data. Imagine that for your external auditors, telling them at the end of the quarter, oh, by the way, we've lost our Excel file. That's probably not a lot of fun, but we've seen recently rising in SEC compliance activities where they're actually going after companies because they don't have any controls within their processes that they just adopted.
And the other big area, and Kim, I'll ask you to comment about treasury and cash management in a second, is the data, right? What they're not getting is the insights. They might comply, but how do you get insights from a spreadsheet? And that's what we're going to focus on today. So Kim, treasury and cash management, we're seeing a lot of this activity.
Yeah, and a lot of things, what I'm finding from different customers and clients that we have right now is they really want to make sure they have that visibility and control over their cash. They're looking to see how can they make sure that they can see where their cash is real time at any time, make sure they don't have cash being idle, just sitting there and having to worry about the compensating balances. But they also want to make sure that for any kind of money going out the door, any kind of payments that we're making, whether it be a treasury payment or an AP payment, that we're making sure that we have the proper controls in place and approval at all times. And of course, our auditors and our SOX compliance is very happy when we're putting in those controls using the systems and processes within the SAP. And that's what we're working on for a lot of our clients today.
Yep. Okay. So what's next? I love this slide, and because it talks about and really highlights what the purpose of this is and the focus is. It's really moving from an old model where we're just running the business, and we spend a lot of our time on operations and on managing the data as opposed to driving the insights and getting real-time insights. And so we're using, whether it's automation tools or the analytics that we're talking about in dashboards, to move to the next level where you're spending more of your time on real-time insights, but then a little bit about predictive. And then the next phase, that transformation. So think of this again from an analytics perspective of you've complied, you have some limited insights and you're able to comply, but now from an analytics view, you're getting real-time insights. That's optimization. That's taking it to the next level. But if you really want to transform your business, advanced analytics and predictive tools will be required to do that. So with that in mind, Julio, why don't you talk a little bit about what we're finding companies want? What are they looking for?
Well, John, I think now the default from the executive team, especially what's going on in the world economy today, is, as Kim mentioned, we're talking about cash, talk about visibility. They just want real-time data. They want real-time data, and that comes about when it comes to the back office. It's about closing your books faster. Why are companies trying to close their books faster? Because we as accountants want to present that C-suite with the information at their fingertips. They want to make these decisions quicker because, as we know, the faster you can make decisions, the better the outcome. Also, they want to be able to do the what-if scenario analysis. They want to look at analytics and say, okay, what if I did this? What if I changed my SKU? What if I changed my offerings this quarter? How is that going to look? What about if I change my discount programs? These are things that go into the FP&A process as, CFOs, CEOs, executives. What they're looking for today is, okay, historically, this is what we did. But how do we take the historical data, put it into a framework where they can look at it and say, okay, this is where we are today. What's going to happen tomorrow? What do I need to do to happen tomorrow to make sure that I have the outcome that we're looking for?
Exactly. That's well said. So what you're telling me is that the CFOs and the CXOs and the leaders of the corporation really want the information and insights when, where, and how they want, and they want it done now. So with that in mind, Sarah Thompson, how exactly can we help companies and leaders gain some insights into the data? How do we help them make those kinds of decisions? Sarah?
Yep,
You're on
I'm here,
mute.
John.
Cool.
Can you hear me? Can you see my screen?
We can.
Perfect. So what we're looking at here is a view of a dashboard or an option that you would be able to see as a financial representative. So this is a financial representation of the examples that we can see for different dashboard capabilities.
Mm-hmm.
So with that, we can see here we're looking at our high level view. We can see our KPIs that are important to us. This is an example of kind of the art of the possible. So this connects to the live data. So like Julio was saying, in having dashboarding capabilities that connect to live data that update as things are happening and transactions are happening within the system, we'll be able to see in real time how our net revenue changes, our total expenses. For this particular example, we can also bring in outside outsourced data. So for example, here we're looking at a news feed. So if we wanted to track how other companies are doing or track how maybe there's just some news feed against some updates and how you're doing within kind of the markets, you'll be able to bring that information in as well. What's great about these dashboarding capabilities is it's really specific to what each company is looking for. So for example, here, we're starting at the high level. We're starting at the level where we can see just our main KPIs. And then as we create multiple screens, we're actually able to get into the different types of detail that we want to see. So maybe from an executive boardroom level, we then want to see some more detail. So we can see here we've got our earnings and expenses, again, brought in from our first screen. But the first screen is really just going to give us that overview. This next screen now shows us we have some options to see how we want to filter the data. Maybe we've got different business areas or profit centers. Again, any of these different fields that want to get brought in to be able to show filters are available. We can see here, so if we wanted to actually make some changes to the data here, we can make those filters available. We can drill into one particular area. Drill down capabilities are also available if we wanted to say, this year in 2020, we want to drill into Q3. Let's say based off of the time in Q3, we can drill down in each of these areas and get further level detail, as well as fully drilling back into your S/4HANA environment.
Right.
The last screen would be just adding some additional context. So from a high-level financial view, what are some of the other KPIs that you'll be able to see within your S4 system, but just from a high level. John was talking about the ability to bring in, cash flow position, as well as, things like payables outstanding or days sales outstanding, being able to see these high-level KPIs and then decide what the actionable items are from here.
That's terrific, Sarah. And I love that drill down capability, and particularly, going back to the home screen, as we think of a CFO or a controller who might have a question, right? Think about, and maybe, Julio will paint a little bit of a scenario here.
Mm-hmm.
The CFO, I'm the CFO. I log in, I get my home screen, it comes up, and I'm looking at my net revenue figures. I might drill down into that and say, that's really interesting. Let's talk about a scenario in which, I might come back to you and say, well, Julio, I noticed the revenue, I drilled down on that. What's going on with deferred revenue? And typically in the past, what did we see? What did we, what was the experience in the past before we dive into the next
Yeah.
stage?
So John, what Sarah just showed there is so powerful for two reasons. The first reason is, and there are many companies out there that are still doing it today, is you close your books on day 7 or day 10 or what have you, and then you spend the next 5 to 7 days putting together exactly what Sarah showed in a package. From my own experience, this is what I used to do for 5 days out of every quarter end because we didn't have SAC Cloud. What you've just seen there is as soon as you close the books, or even before, you can start running these key reports over and over to get that clarity. And as opposed to printing it out, exporting to Excel, what Sarah just did is it's in the cloud already, and you just basically send it to your CEO, send it to your CFO. Now let's talk about revenue specifically. When we talk about revenue, and I love Sarah's first page because revenue is the most important line item for any company, whether you're in industrials, whether you're doing in financials, it's the most important line item. But I think once you present that to an executive team, the next question they're going to ask you is, tell me more. What happened in our revenue? Why is our revenue up? Why is it down? Let's talk about our deferred revenue, to your point, John. And then, any CFO is going to understand, let's link the revenue trends to ASC 606 and how can we see how is that impacting our bottom line. So with that, I'll turn it over to Sarah and she will show some deep analytics on that.
So here's the home screen, and it looks really awesome. But Sarah, how does it really work?
So I'm going to start, like you said, John, I want to start at a high level. So what actually is possible is you're able to actually link multiple types of dashboards together. So for example, like John and Julio were just talking about, you've got a net revenue. So we can actually go from our net revenue here and jump to a more specific dashboard focusing on revenue. So you've got the ability to drill down into other dashboards that are created as well. So like we were just seeing, we've got a dashboard out there for revenue. So we can actually see a breakdown, where our revenue contracts are, what are the materials or products that are being sold within our contracts that we have for both products and services, and then we can see the posted amount by country. So right now we're just focusing on the US. But again, this is going to take us deeper into our revenue analysis from our high-level financial overview.
Sarah, I'm still seeing the home screen, that Analytics Cloud content, the net revenue, total expenses. There we go.
Are you able to see now?
Yes.
Perfect. Yep, so this just brings us in, and this is where you can see that everything John was just showing on the screen. So the products on the left-hand side, services in the middle, and then our countries. And then from a high level, this is just kind of showcasing the overall overview for our revenue analysis. Now we've got the ability to drill into different areas. Like Julio was saying, tying it to 606 accounting, we can come in and see revenue analysis. So you can see amounts posted by materials, by performance obligations, so you can tie the two together. From events and time-based performance obligations. You can get into deferred revenue analysis. So you can see the deferred revenue that's available for this year, looking ahead a few years, and then tying it to actual disaggregation reports, as well as being able to see, for example, our unsatisfied revenue over the life of the contract. So you can see here, we've got event-based and time-based revenue that is unsatisfied going forward for this year, and then totals as you add in multiple years and multiple contracts.
And of course, you can drill down into that, right?
Yes, you'd be able to drill down into these contracts and take them back to the contracts that you'd be able to see live. Yep.
Okay, great. So Julio, what does that mean to you as a controller?
So what does that mean to me is what Sarah has successfully shown us is she went from the boardroom to the staff accountant. And what do I mean by that? I mean that, she went from the executive overview, the digital boardroom of revenue, but then there's a lot more that goes into that because, why is that important? So the CFO may ask, if I'm his controller, his or her controller, they may ask, okay, well, Julio, that's all good. Our top line looks good. But what if I change my goods and services allocation? How is that going to impact my gross margin? And these are the types of analyses that customers are doing right now because they're trying to say, okay, if I push more product for Q4, how is that going to result in my overall year-end margin? If I do less services, so there's all types of analyses. It's really, as Sarah said, it's really the art of the possible. What is possible is whatever your imagination can aspire to be, which is show me everything you can from revenue, top line, to the granular of what is my posting price? What is my unsatisfied performance obligation? And how does that all tie into the whole picture of my revenue performance for the company I'm referring to?
Absolutely, and it so reduces the amount of time to get answers and ask questions in two ways, right? It's all about, number one, the information is there at your fingertips and people can access it quickly and easily using these tools and manipulate it and look at it on different dimensions. But if you think about how much time you spent, and I know I spent this when I was doing work like this. Hey Julio, what version of that Excel spreadsheet did you have? When did you pull that data? That's not the case. This is live data. It's the most recent and current, and everybody is talking from a single source of information, right?
Yes.
And you know what I wanted to also add? I mean, back in the day, can you remember how much time, Julio and John, it used to take when we wanted to give executive information? We had to, how much time it took for us to prepare it, and we said we can only do it on a quarterly basis because it takes so much time and effort to pull it together. Now, I mean, we can pull this information together at our fingertips, critical information that, our senior management needs to know how we're doing as a business. And it's come such a long way.
It has. It's fantastic. So, we talked about this from a revenue perspective, and when we looked at the digital boardroom, we have revenue, but we also have expenses, and we know that a lot of companies might have questions, right? So a scenario might be that I pick up the phone and say, "Hey, Julio, as the controller, I need to know what's going on, with the gross margin. Why are we seeing impacts on our EBITDA? What's going on with what's happening?" And you would dive into it and say, "Oh, looks like we have a lot of expenses for leases." What would be your scenario, and how would you approach that, similarly under the old world? And then, and Sarah, I'll turn it over and we can show the leasing dashboard.
Yes, John. So from a leasing perspective, it's been on the minds of every, CFO controller in the world, I would say, in the last 3 years, because this is something that has impacted many companies, especially ones who have high volume retail environments. And I think from my perspective, you have a lot of expenses coming onto the balance sheet, and you have a lot of new assessments, which mean that now, instead of having these various sundry expenses, you have operating lease expenses. And to your point is, you can start from the digital boardroom where you have a high level expense category, and then you look at your lease expense and it has gone up significantly. And part of the explanation is going to be, well, we've just adopted the new leasing standard, or we're about to. So we've put a number of leases that were previously unclassified as lease expense onto the right category, which is lease expense. So now we can do a deep dive into our new lease expense analysis. Sarah?
Sure. Sarah?
Yes, so like Julio was saying, we can start at the high level. So if we come back to our overview boardroom again, this time on the detailed screen, you can see here, this is where we're seeing our earnings expenses. So like Julio was saying, we can look at our expenses, look at how they're trending, and then always drill into the detailed dashboards. So if we wanted to drill into other dashboards, we'd be able to come in, see a contract and lease management, and actually drill on into more detail around our expenses. So for example, we come in, we'll be able to see here, we've created kind of high-level KPIs around our leases. So we've got the amount of contracted leases that we have out there, the assets that we have, the amount of movables versus non-movable leases, and then what our overall annual spend is per contract. So we can see here the amount that we have for our contracts and how it goes out starting from the initial date of the contracts through the end of the life of contract. So we've got, some contracts out there that are 5, 10 years long. We'll be able to see the actual amount that we'll be spending for those contracts. So again, this is an example of how you can bring in that expense data, how you can bring in your contract expenditures at a high KPI level, and then again, having the ability to do that additional detail that Julio was talking about. So getting into some additional analysis, if I wanted to come in and see my overall expense amount per contract, so I can actually see my contract names here, and these tie back into S/4HANA. So these are the ability to actually drill in and open a contract, be able to see what that contract looks like within S/4HANA with real-time drill through capabilities. So it's not just sorry, I don't have that one logged in. It's not just a static dashboard, but being able to actually drill in to those contracts. And then it also will filter down on all the contracts that we're looking at on each one. We can see contract details. So what's my average length of my contracts, depending on different types of contracts that we have within the system? What is my expiry for those contracts? Are we looking at, contracts that have expiry in the next couple of months? How can I go in and take a look at those contracts that we're actually looking for to make sure, whether or not we're renewing, or what we're going to do with the contracts when they do expire?
Right.
And again, these are examples of what we've seen. Another one is being able to actually view the assets, so an asset analysis. So if we're looking at different types of assets that we have out there, you can see in real time if your assets of fleet vehicles or machinery has gone up in the last month or so, being able to track those assets, where they are, and what you're doing with those assets. And then lastly, an overall vendor analysis. So you're able to see what are the rates or expenditures that you're getting with each of your vendors, what are the expenditures for contracts with each of these vendors that you have out there, being able to actually track that at a vendor level to be able to make the best decisions for your contracts with each vendor.
And I think, John, so if you look at, so the purpose of the webinar is really turning compliance into competitive advantage. What Sarah is showing right now on the screen is a competitive advantage because, for the traditional financial reporting for lease accounting, it would be one line item on the P&L. It says $50 million. What Sarah is actually showing is that $50 million is made up of these number of vendors. So how can I turn that as a controller or CFO into an opportunity? Well, the reality is, and this is actually from a customer's example, the customer told us, as you remember, John, is that they looked at their vendors based on this screenshot and they said, you know what, we are paying the same vendor all over our 5 jurisdictions. And instead of talking to each individually, we talked to the main office and we were about to save a bunch of money because essentially they said, we are paying you for 15 different leases in different countries, and now we can consolidate that and give you a better savings. So I think that is the value when we talk about how can we turn compliance into opportunity.
Right, and exactly, you hit the nail on the head of what we've been discussing and our customers have been saying. Also, it gives you an opportunity to understand who your vendor pool is. Maybe you want to aggregate them all together, but at the same time, you may find that there's a vendor you didn't know about and is offering you a much better, more advantageous rate, you may want to shift. You may want to look at risk exposure. Remember, also in a lot of these exercises, it's also about risk and exposure and how much do you have with a single vendor. Do I have too many of my assets with ABC company, and I may be concerned that during these times of economic distress, if you will, or interesting economic times, what if that customer runs into trouble? How do I make sure that I've balanced my portfolio appropriately to mitigate the amount of risk I might have? Another scenario, Julio, you and I talked about is, the revenue, the leasing, and we showed in a previous webinar how you could sublet space to help you out from a cost of your real estate leases. So it gives you a tremendous opportunity to take some basic insights and then take actions to them, right? So with that, let's turn to, we talked a lot about revenue and how do we dive into the money and understand better what's going on from a revenue perspective. We talked about the leases, and we saw how you can begin to drill down and get more information about where I'm spending my money. But then money going out and money coming in is really all about Treasury. So Kim, let's talk a little bit about what SAP is doing and what we're doing around this. And one of the things that you and I have talked about and seen with customers is they have three things that they want to do in today's economy. And the analytics and insights are crucial to this. It's manage their cash. Where is my money? Not only where is it from a bank perspective, where is it overall? Where is it in countries? What am I doing with it? How do I streamline and automate my treasury processes? Can I lower banking costs, enhance operational quality? And then finally, the mitigation of these risks. But in order to do that, you need insights. Maybe you can talk about, take a moment to talk about this.
Yes, John. In some of the cases, in order to be able to have this ability to manage your cash and streamline your processes and mitigate these risks, you really need to have all your data real time in one place. You need to be able to bring it together so you can actually manage it efficiently, and you can make decisions very quickly. So, for example, being able to bring in all of your bank statements into one central place so you can visualize where all your cash is, by region, by entity, by bank account, by currency, whatever view you may want to look at it, to be able to have those real-time views of your cash. You can look at your prior day, your current day, and so forth. Be able to actually look at all of your treasury-related activity as well, any investments or hedging activities, to be able to bring that in and see what your positions are at any one time by company or by entity and so forth. Looking at your accounts payable payments, looking at your accounts receivables, be able to bring all that information into one central place so you can see your overall position for your company, all your cash flows coming in or out relating to all your activities. By streamlining these processes and bringing them in together, you can actually mitigate those risks for making sure that your any kind of flows are actually approved and don't go out the door without the proper approvals. And you also have that ability to know where it is at any one time and make those any kind of decisions that you need to be made for regulatory compliance purposes or to support your treasury activities.
Mm-hmm. So you've talked about this Analytics Cloud Executive Dashboard. Maybe you can share with us kind of what does SAP and what does Bramasol offer?
Yeah, this is really cool. It's really come a long way, and this goes really much in line with what you were just showing on revenue recognition and leasing. So the treasury-led activities as well, within the, of course, within SAP, treasury systems, you have really quite robust reporting capabilities. Anyone of the users can actually go in and perform their activities to the Fury tiles and see all their dashboards and the reports and drill down to the nitty-gritty. However, you think about it, the treasurer or the CFO, may not want to be going down to that level of detail and having to go and figure out which view or tile he wants to pick and try to manipulate the data into the different views. He wants to have one-stop shopping. He wants to have he or she would like to have an executive dashboard so they can actually see the type of information that's important to them in one place. So within the S4, we have Analytics Cloud, in 1909 that we have right now, as well as the new one that's coming up in 2020 release. There's quite a few of these standard, already ready to go analytics dashboards that you can look at. You can also build your own if you'd like to by taking some of the other reporting information and bringing it in if you so like. So what I wanted to show was just a couple of them here. List them out that we have, such as, for example, we have the under the Treasury related dashboard, we have our liquidity where we can see our liquidity by region. You can see by company code, financial position, currency, and so forth. You can also see your cash position forecast by region or company code or your bank account currency, for example. Or you can look at bank relationship management, where that's where you hold all of your bank accounts, looking at what payment amounts that you have, company code, your funds, looking at what your credit lines are on all your bank accounts or the ratings. You can then go in to look at your debt insights. What kind of debt transactions do I have out there? Every single transaction that you may have, you can see every one of those details, see what the maturity profile looks like, what's the interest rate profile on those items, what are they, how many you have by company code or by region and so forth. You can also dive deeper into looking at your market risk. What's your net present value or your value at risk? Go into your market overview. What are your exchange rates been over time? What are your interest rates been over time? So you can make the proper decisions at your fingertips. It makes it so much easier to get that information real time. If you so wanted to dive deep into where the transactions originated, you could. And then the last one I wanted to talk about was your analytic clouds for capital management. That's where you can look at your credit management, your collections management, or disputes management. So you can, for example, looking at working capital. What are your credit limits exposures over your different risk classes? What's your overall percentage of those risk classes?
Sure.
So having said that, I can actually show you some of these dashboards and what they look like. I'm not going to go dive down into them as Sarah had. So I actually took some pictures of our Analytics Cloud, and I just picked a few of them that I thought were, meaningful, that folks probably want to look at the most. And one being your cash position forecast. You can actually drill into this. You can have it pop up on your dashboard just like it is right now. But if the treasurer or the CFO wanted to look at it by, say I only want to look at it by company code by region, I only want to look at Asia Pacific, or I only want to look at Middle East Africa, they can select how they want to look at it. So they can look at all their cash by their region, they can look at it by their company codes, they can look at it by their bank account currency, their positions for their banks, and their positions by their bank accounts. And you can see all the different levels of details that would be in there. And of course, again, you can just narrow it down by, areas that you may want to look at. So it really gives you that incredible flexibility. And you can also still dive right down into to see what's actually making up that level of detail.
Absolutely. You can also look at your.
Sorry, John?
I said we can also take a look at the banks, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so then here's where we come up with the bank account management. Now, as we know, with the S4 is where you actually have the module to have all of your bank account information in one place. It's more of a master data than configuration. It has a lot of capabilities that you can have all your information managed by your treasury and by your business in one place. And this is just one view of what you can do. You can do a lot more than what I'm showing right here. If you want to get into the credit lines and so forth, and looking at the different ratings and whatnot that you may have bringing in from the different rating agencies, which I used to do on a quarterly basis for the CEO of the company that I used to work for. So in this case, you can I want to look at your banks by your ratings. I want to look at my bank account. What are the different banks that I have right now? What do I have by company codes? Who is actually investing by company code with what bank? Who's using those banks, and how much are they actually using? What kind of payments are we making by bank? You have all those options of looking at this information, and you can see, your little KPIs at the top where you may have set it up where you wanted to look at all of your incoming. You want to look at what's on your outgoing, your average is as well. It gives you that flexibility to look at it the way you want. This is a standard view, but you still have the flexibility to slice it and dice it and look at it in different views and actually drill down to the lower level, and it's all real time.
Right. And what I enjoy and what I like about this, and I know our customers do too, is the ability to really understand, again, as you said, that bank relationship and manage multiple dimensions, whether it's bank fees, how am I looking at, and I could drill down and take a look at the different kinds of transactions to manage my ACH fees or my direct wire fees or different types of fees that I might have, or manage things like compensating balances and
Mm-hmm.
understand how I can lower that, right, by knowing what my incoming and outgoings were. You can also look at it from, as you pointed out, an exposures perspective. Do I have too much money with a single bank in a single region, right?
Right. That's very important to the CEOs and treasurers of the companies, where they really want to make sure that what is our exposures and based on our different credit ratings, because you're always going to have limits of what you can expose the company to based on the ratings of those companies. So then you can actually see, what those exposures are. You control them much easier. It's real time, so you can stay on top of it and make any kind of decisions or changes as time goes by.
Absolutely. And then, of course, with the great information about things like bank accounts by bank, this is pretty, this is a company that's pretty clean, but you and I both know that often we'll see Commerce Bank is not 8, but 80 accounts. And
Right.
now you can begin to dive into that and say, well, what is that all about? Goodness.
Yeah, and
Right.
it really gets even more critical as when you start expanding into the global world and you're a very large global company. It makes it a lot easier when you can see globally where your cash is
Right.
and what banks and so forth at any one time. But just think about it. Think about what it used to take and all the Excel spreadsheets and all the time and effort it used to take to pull all this information together. Once you have your information together real time in one place, whether you're using a standalone treasury system or you're doing it as part of the company as a whole, you have all your information in one place, so you can actually visualize it real time very easily without going through a lot of extra effort and time. So if I have the treasurer that comes to me and says, I need to know, what do we have for exposures with X bank because that bank is having some financial difficulty, I can go right and open this up right away and see it, or she or he can do it themselves.
Absolutely. And because it's with SAP and it's not a treasury, a standalone treasury solution, I can look at it by whatever dimension I want, whether
Mm-hmm.
I want to look at my treasury payments and receipts, or I'm looking at my APAR in a standalone or a disconnected TRM system. You can't do that. You can't really get a good sense and look at that.
Not easily, unless without bringing in a lot of different interfaces and maintaining all those
Right.
interfaces. It's not
Right.
conducive to that.
Right, and we know at interfaces, one thing, just like the world, what's the single thing that never changes in the world is change, and the same is true of interfaces. As everybody changes and adds features, interfaces change, and with SAP, of course, you don't have that problem because it's all integrated.
Exactly.
You talked about credit limit utilization, and this is kind of a really cool dashboard. It's always nice to know, where my money is and what I can use, right?
Yeah, and the reason why I wanted to show this one, it also was, an area that I do manage over, and it's also a very critical one because, when a lot of, companies are looking at their working capital management, they're looking at, what are my credit limit exposures? What's my, per risk class, or what's my over percentage per risk class? This was just one of the screens that I wanted to bring in to show my credit limit utilization, and this is an executive dashboard for that, so they can actually look at it based on your top KPIs by risk class in this case. And you can drill down into your different segments. You can look at it by country. You can look at it by credit group and so forth. It has all the ability to filter on that and see that data real time based on how you might want to look at it. And as we know, there's a lot of critical, if you don't have, how do I want to say this? You really need to know what your exposures are. What are your limits? what's your total exposure, based by class, where are you right now? Because you really need to be on top of it. You need to extend those credit limits. You need to hone those back in based on the different companies and the different classes of where your exposures are, because you may have customers that are going in default right now, and you need to know what that exposure is so you can quickly react to it. Or you may know that there's companies that buy to you on a regular basis and they really need, that extra exposure. How can you see what you have with them right now, and how much can you afford to extend that that exposure to that particular customer?
Absolutely, absolutely. Julio, I'm going to ask you a comment about something around this, but one of the things at Bramasol and one of the things that this allows you to do is connect the dots. And Julio, as we've been talking, you and I have been involved with SAP on this concept of the solution economy, or the outcome-based economy, where flexibility and more customers are using either pay-as-you-go models, et cetera. You need this flexibility to understand how to react, and of course, connecting tools like BRIM to this process and the advanced AR/AP tools available through the BRIM platform and portfolio are important. From your perspective as a finance professional, what does that bring to the table?
Well, it really brings timeliness, John. I mean, I think in today's economy, where everything is so fast and companies have to react so quickly to every type of information, changes in business models, changes in customer preferences. I think when you have these sophisticated billing models, you want something that's going to be able to consume it and report on it as quickly as possible. But more importantly, what you were looking for is, if you have it, and we find this every day, especially with these high tech companies in the Bay Area, they have new business models coming out every day. They're trying to do different revenue streams, introduce new products, new services, and you need a tool like that that's going to consume all that data and make sense of it. Because if you can't make sense of it and you can't say, okay, if we do this launch of this new product or service, they always say you have to fail fast, is how do you look at it? Like when you talk about BRIM, John, you talk about the innovations of it. It's how do you bring it into a system that's going to understand it, manipulate it, and then report it? Because even though you have a new product or service, what the executive team is looking for is, what's the result of all these things that we're doing? How is it making an impact or not impacting my bottom line? So I think those are the things that the timeliness of decision making is of critical importance in today's world of fast changes.
Well, and especially as you and I both know, working on a couple of different projects with a large technology company, we just finished connecting and helping them connect their BRIM solution to their credit management, and visibility like this is crucial to that. In addition, you and I are spending a lot more time in finding people thinking about lessor and leases. We thought leasing was going to go away, and what we're finding is that's not true. More and more companies are using a lease model, and part of that requires you to have this kind of visibility, right?
Exactly, John. And I think, when you talk about lessor, everybody's thinking, well, lessor is just leasing, right? And, we speak about this all the time, but lessor is actually revenue, right? So
Yep.
it actually brings together two modes of revenue. It's the revenue accounting, but also if you flip it over, how do you account for that? How do you account for your lessor revenue? Are you going to use CLM in SAP? Are you going to use RAR? And there's different variations of that. But the good thing about it, John, is all these solutions are available within the SAP world. So that's good for us.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Julio. Thank you, everyone. So let's wrap this up now that we're about 5 minutes away. What we've learned and seen today is a lot of companies have complied but are looking to optimize and transform. They've taken the steps to do what they need to do, whether it's with regard to the rev rec or leasing. requirements or basic Treasury requirements, whether it deals with SOX compliance, basic GAAP. They're doing the things that need to get done to do basic business, but they want to take it further. They want to move to lights out accounting. And we saw the slide and talked about the move away from spending so much time on operations and focused on understanding the data, finding where the data came from, bringing that data in, and validating that data to online tools like what we saw today from Sarah and Kim about here are dashboards and tools that bring that data to your fingertips. And now moving that to the next step, and we'll talk in the future about predictive analytics and where you can take that next. Digital dashboard. We talked about how the digital dashboard gives C-level executives insights to ask questions. But it's not enough that you can just ask questions. You need to be able to drill through to answer those key questions. Why have I seen an increase in my liabilities? How is that going to affect my return on assets? How is that going to affect any debt covenants I might have? What are my balances in a particular bank? And how do those then relate to all of that information about my leases or my assets? What does my deferred revenue look like? Can you tell me why do I have a lot more outstanding POBs? Why haven't I executed against some of those event-based POBs, such as upgrades or software upgrades or other different areas of that? So what we've learned today is, Bramasol has the tools, bringing together with the SAP team, an ability to really look at the complete comply, optimize, transform, give you the data that you need and the insights you need at your fingertips to make the decisions that you need today. So with that, I want to thank everybody for joining us. I want to thank Julio. Thank you again for a great job. Sarah, for, as always, a wonderful demo of the tools we have and some keen and fantastic insights from Kim on Treasury. Remind everybody that this is being recorded, so feel free to go on and download it. Look for more webinars. We'll be talking later in November about lessor accounting and some really interesting insights and tools that we can provide for companies doing that, and continue to check us out for new innovations around this space. So thank you, everybody. I want to thank you, all of you. Please stay safe, stay well, and we look forward to seeing you on our next webinars.